Assalamu alaikum, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to another amazing Saturday session. We are going to be covering two short surahs, two really powerful surahs, Surah 102, Al Takathur, and also Surah 107, Al Ma'un. And I'm so looking forward to that. These are our 94th and 95th surahs on this Project Illumine journey of 114 surahs. I want to start though by highlighting the really powerful, really important khutbah yesterday, which is titled Zelzalas, which means earthquakes in Arabic, and the moral and amoral choices that we make. And obviously, you know, all of us are really affected by the pictures, the videos, everything that we're seeing, all the news that's coming out of Turkey and Syria after the earthquake. And, you know, Zelzala is also, you know, what we talk about when we talk about the tests that we receive as Muslims throughout our life, right? Sometimes we're tested with things that are small and minor, and then on the other end of the scale, zelzalas, which are life-changing, earth-shattering, literally. And so yesterday, you know, obviously I imagine that every pulpit of the Prophet was talking about what was going on as far as the earthquakes were concerned. It was very interesting because, you know, Sheikh shared with us that there is actually a cleric that was saying that this earthquake came as a punishment from Allah because Muslims didn't respond appropriately to the burning of the Qurans in Sweden, which is, as Sheikh points out, a very arrogant and very wrong way to understand the earthquakes, and, you know, proceeds to talk to us and you share with us about how we should understand what happened or what has happened, and how we should reflect upon that. And so much of it comes down to our choices, our moral choices and our amoral choices. And because we have the power of choice, anytime there is something that involves a choice, there's ethics and morality that are involved. And so we, you know, this engagement, obviously, that, you know, Sheikh has taken us on with Project Illumine, and the consistent, you know, approach that he teaches us is really one of very active and vibrant engagement with ethics, and how you really have to think consequentially about the choices that you make, or the choices that you don't make. So he pointed out, for example, that in this part of the country where the earthquakes happened, if you go back into history and you research and you study, you know that this is not an uncommon occurrence. And so it's very important that we as moral beings, when we're making decisions, for example, to do city planning, build buildings, you know, put certain you know, restrictions or guidelines into place, these are things that we have to take into account. Because, you know, obviously, like we lived in California where we have many, many earthquakes, and, you know, when those things happen, you don't see the scale of death and destruction, largely because a lot of those decisions about how you build your buildings, how you plan your city, or whatever, you know, whatever resources you have in the event that the earthquake comes, that you're prepared. And that is a moral choice that you have to make when you are thinking about, you know, how to do the right thing. And so a lot of times people like to throw the blame on God and say, well, why is it that God allowed all of this destruction to happen, instead of looking inward and saying, okay, what did we as a society choose to do, knowing full well that this is an area where there will be earthquakes, there will be situations where there, you know, will be a lot of destruction that can come, and have we done the job of properly planning and taking into account, you know, what is more important, you know, and oftentimes, you know, these are choices that we know in our world come down to profit, come down to economics, but we have to, you know, step up and make the right choices. It's a really powerful khutbah that takes us through a lot of different things that help us to understand and see the, you know, and really focus on contemplating the impact of the choices that we make, the moral choices and amoral choices that we make. So please do watch that, or you will, obviously, if you are subscribed to our weekly email, and get, you know, the summary of that in next week's weekly email. So I wanted to also announce a very lovely conversation that we have planned. Usuli will be co-hosting with the Noor Center in Toronto a talk a week from tomorrow. So that would be Sunday, February the 19th at 4 o'clock Eastern Time, where Sheikh will be in conversation with Aziza Kanji of the Noor Center, who he's had many conversations with in the past that were really smart, amazing, wonderful, very reflective. And the topic is going to be love. And so it's, you know, Sheikh has actually talked a lot about love in the Islamic tradition, and it's a really important understanding, because a lot of times people, when they think about Islam or whatever, they don't think of love as being a very rich part of our tradition. And so Sheikh has done a lot in terms of giving khutbahs and lectures and writings about the depth of the topic of love in the Islamic tradition. And so hopefully this conversation will bring to light a lot of those really beautiful, insightful findings and wisdom. So this is going to be a Zoom talk. If you get our weekly email, you'll have the link. You can also go to the Noor Center website, and we'll also post the links so you can have access to it via Zoom on our website. So we'll post that as well. And interestingly, I also shared some links in my weekly email where if you want to actually listen to some of these lectures, they're there. But also, interestingly, in Prophet's Pulpit Volume 1, we have a whole section dedicated to the topic of love, Section 2. So a couple of these khutbahs that I link to in my weekly email actually made it into the Prophet's Pulpit as, short, powerful chapters. And so you can read that there. But we have a whole section that is just mind-blowing. And in that spirit, I thought I would share a really lovely email that we got from India, from someone who received the Prophet's Pulpit as part of our Share with a Friend campaign. And just to update you now, we've sent out more than 2,500 books. God bless Barwa, who's in charge of this project. And we've sent it out to about 60 countries, I think. I mean, it's hard to keep up. We're busy processing and not having enough time to count the countries, but it's definitely in that neighborhood, which is just absolutely incredible, and the requests keep coming in. So I just thought, and we've gotten so many beautiful emails from people who have received the books and who were really touched, but I just thought I would share this one. Assalamu alaikum. I received the book about 2 weeks back and have wanted to send a reply ever since. I came to know about the Usuli Institute through Instagram about a year ago. Since then, I have watched videos of the Sheikh and read some khutbah transcripts. They were very informative and eye-opening, but the book has been more helpful than what I expected and came to me at a point when I was down mentally and spiritually. All of the sermons in the book allowed me to reflect on myself, my beliefs, and my relationship with God. I am truly grateful for this book and appreciate the work you're doing at the Usuli Institute. So that is, lovely, and I really thank the people who write to us and let us know, because as I always say, we really don't know how the work we're doing affects people unless they let us know, and I'm so grateful for really just the countless messages of love and beauty that just are mind-blowing. And so the last thing I want to share is, I've talked about this in the past. I just want to kind of give a little highlight. Last night, I finished the prospectus on the Sira project, which is our next major project after the Tafsir project. And so I'm not ready to share it yet, but I'm going to share it. I'm planning to share it with next week's weekly email. So if you're not subscribed, absolutely do. But I'll talk about it at the beginning of next week's Halaqah too. But, I've talked about this before. I'm so excited, as we're coming down to the end of this, incredible Project Illumine journey. We want to look forward to what's next on the horizon and what, are some of the big projects that we really want to engage in. And so this is Project Illumine II. And it's the light of the Prophet Muhammad, the Sirah Halaqas. So, this is Project Illumine, the light of the Quran. Project 2 is the light of Prophet Muhammad. And it's going to be an absolutely stunning journey if we are able to raise the funds to make it happen. So we do have, I'll share more of the details in my weekly email and next week. But we do have some, pretty aggressive fundraising that we need to do. But as people who follow us know, the Sira project is like the Tafsir project, going to be spectacular, one of a kind. It's life-changing, insights, and it's not, as we've talked about, it's not like a history or account of the chronology of what happened to the Prophet in his lifetime. It's not like a list of the battles. It's not a official history where you don't really feel a connection necessarily with the Prophet. But this is an intimate portrait. It's really understanding what we call, the sunnah of the beloved. Like, why did the people around the Prophet Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, fall in love with him? Why, what was it that how was he as a human being? How did he react in certain situations? It's really something that is beautiful and arises from this extensive research that Sheikh has done over his lifetime of, the original Arabic texts, and addresses, like the whole idea, a lot of these hadith that oftentimes are, not very clear, or that people struggle with. One of the really beautiful things that Sheikh was explaining to me in one of these conversations that really hit it home for me was he said that as he was doing this research of this entire corpus of reports about the Prophet, it became really clear that a lot of who the Prophet is built on sort of these medieval mythologies and the way that people would think about things. And it was a very different time, and so a lot of the research was sifting through a lot of that, and he said that every so often you would come across reports that were a testimony of something real. It had all the earmarks of something real that the Prophet did, that when you start actually collecting then all of these reports that emerge as bits and pieces of something real and you put it together, what emerges is this picture of a man who was just great. You understand why he was so great and why what he did was so great. And so this is going to be that type of presentation. And Sheikh actually did a 8-session series called Humanistic Approaches to the Life of the Prophet back in the 90s. We actually have it, or early 2000s, we have it on our SoundCloud channel. And it's a very similar thing where it was really seeking to understand the Prophet as the human being, the person. And so it's really going to be something like that, but expanded and much deeper. And so this is obviously knowledge that is so important for us, especially in this Islamophobic age that we live in, where Muslims really don't have that knowledge or that intimacy with the Prophet, that when they hear something that an Islamophobe says, it shakes their faith. And we hear all the time about people, or people write to us and say, oh, I heard this about the Prophet, people are accusing him of being a pedophile, the age of Aisha, all this sort of stuff. This Islamophobic discourse causes so much damage, and we as Muslims don't have the knowledge to, return or address or counter all of that. And so this is a really important project, even just at that level. So anyway, there's, again, I'll share more of the details, but I hope people will start to get really, really excited. This is something that if we can raise the funds, we would love to start doing in January of 2024, but we need to hit a fundraising deadline of June 30th of this year. So anyway, if you're really excited and you really want to know the details, email me and I'll share the prospectus with you. I just have a little bit more work to do before I, put it out as either like a fundraising campaign or, talk about it in a way that is a little, it's not too much information at once. So anyway, but I'm so excited because, we have a lot of really important projects to do, a lot of things that only Sheikh can, do, as we know. It's just so exciting, and I hope that we can really make it happen, inshallah, with everyone's help. So with that, I'm so excited to continue on our journey with 2 more powerful short surahs, and thank you everybody for joining us.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين وعلى أصحابه المختارين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب. Alright, so inshallah we will talk about Surah Al Takathur and Al Ma'un. التكاثر and الماعون. Both surahs I of course had covered before in the line by line traditional methodology of tafsir, but tonight if you're interested in all what the different tafsir traditions said about these 2 surahs, go to the halaqas I did before tonight it's a very different approach, inshallah. Um, I would just want to say two quick notes. Um, as as I'm coming to terms with the fact that this journey with the Quran, I mean, my own personal journey with the Quran never ends, as it should never end for anyone. The Quran is a living text that continues to engage and yield, and drawing a line where you stop seems quite arbitrary, because with a living text, um, it never stops speaking, and because it never stops speaking, there's constantly an engagement, and because there's constantly an engagement, there's constantly learning and growth and reflection. But as we approach the arbitrary line where we just say that, um, okay, we've covered all the surah, and this is where we have to stop. Um, of course, it's quite emotional. It's and it's you are constantly interrogating yourself about how you handled the trust, and such an enormous trust, and whether you could have done better, whether you could have done this or that. Anyway, my point is that, for as far as I'm concerned, the tafsir, this tafsir, is not surviving, does not actually live, as long as it is an oral tradition. Uh, it is an offering that can be easily raided by challenged intellects, can be raided, can be co-opted, can be hijacked, can be brutalized, as long as it is an oral a legacy. Then you are offering something that, considering the legacy of Muslims, and unfortunately in the modern age, all the likelihood will be is that exactly the type of people who have no moral qualms about raiding and brutalizing a discourse, that's exactly what they will do. That they will raid and brutalize and steal and co-opt, take a little bit from here, take a little bit from there, pretend that it's always been that, and of course, without attribution, without any concern about the integrity of the whole, without any concern about honesty in discourse, and in fact, this has happened repeatedly with our intellectual traditions in the modern age, because we don't have proper institutions, and our ethics of scholarship have been demolished entirely. And so the tafsir really, the point in which the tafsir maintains a body of integrity is in publication, when it becomes from an oral being to a written being, because the writing is a point of reference that, regardless of how many corruptions emerge, regardless of how many inferior intellects and pseudo intellects come and raid the material and steal the material and co-opt the material and brutalize the material, for whatever purposes, the typical scenario of the practically illiterate imams of today, hardly literate, because I mean, just being able to read doesn't make you a literate human being, or the doctors and engineers that populate the airwaves and pretend to be this and that. Anyway, so the survival of this tafsir is in the writing, and the writing is much harder than the oral delivery, and a much more involved process. And in the case of this tafsir, I think it's going to take years to produce and to get from the point of where it's written to the point where it is actually published. And a number of khutbahs that I gave which focus on the issue of moral choice, my engagement with delivering this tafsir simultaneously has made me constantly go back into our not too distant history, pondering the legacies of serious intellectual efforts that have appeared and the impact they've had. I mean, someone like, for instance, a brilliant intellect and a brilliant intellectual like a Naini in Iran. And in Naini's thoughts about the Quran and his writings on Sharia, or someone like Mullah Sadra. And Mullah Sadra is a type of intellect that truly, if he would have been born not a Muslim, if he would have been born a Jew or a Christian, the quality of his thought is truly transformative. I mean, this is the type of intellect that can be described as civilizationally transformative, the type of intellects that actually transform entire civilizations. But that's not what Naini has done in our tradition, and that's not what Mullah Sadra has done in our tradition, and it's not their fault. It is the fault, again, of our cowardly capital. It is squarely the fault of those that Allah has entrusted with capital and money, and their lack of vision, and their lack of sophisticated understanding, and their lack of morality, and their lack of ethics. Everyone that encounters this tafsir, and this is what my ibadah has told me, and repeatedly, especially since we finished Surah Al Ma'un, everyone that encounters this tafsir is presented with a moral and ethical test. One of these moments where they have to make an ethical choice that will reverberate for generations to come and into the akhirah, of course. And let it be heard. I mean, at least I've said it. At least I've communicated the message. Those who are able to and have encountered this tafsir and could have helped preserve it and failed to do so, I would not want to be in their shoes in the hereafter. This is the scale of moral failure of those who encountered Naini, and instead of working to preserve his thought and to invest in his thought, did everything to bury his thought because of personal jealousies or other weaknesses, or even lack of understanding of what the sophistication of a Naini's thought. which is a very consistent and persistent problem with us. Um, Very few Muslims, till our very day, have any any serious understanding or even pseudo-serious understanding of someone like Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra is you can count on your hand those who have actually managed to understand what Mullah Sadra was contributing to humanity. Okay, so I'm not. I'm not. I mean, I'm not giddy about moving on to the Sirah of the Prophet ﷺ, because I am painfully aware that this entire effort that we've done over 2 years is really not a contribution unless it is preserved in writing. And I don't know if I will live long enough. That's in Allah's hands. As to the Sirah, I just want to say that if any of you want to get a taste of what we're talking about, listen to the halaqas delivered in the 90s about a humanistic approach to the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Keep in mind, this was done in the 90s. Since the 90s, I've had about 20 years to add to my knowledge of the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ. 20 years to add to my knowledge of the Sirah. 20 years to pursue every text, whether published or unpublished, every manuscript I heard of around the world. And here we go again. You know, yes, I believe that it is haram if I go to my grave, and what I've learned if I just simply take it to my grave. But I am extremely anxious about. So now I have 2 babies that I don't know whether they will survive if I get through the Sirah. Baby number 1, the Quran, and the absolute necessity that this be published and preserved as a written text. And baby number 2, the Sirah. And may Allah never put you in a situation where you have to worry about your babies. Because I'm telling you, the stress of this is monumental and quite overwhelming. And especially as, like all of you, you know, I have to do this while making a living. I can't dedicate I can't just be full-time doing this. Okay. So, now, moving on to Surah Al Ma'un, both Surah Al Ma'un and Al Takathur are clearly early Meccan period. There's a little bit of complexity that we'll talk about in a little bit, but about this, but the historically situating. But the best evidence, the overwhelming evidence, is that both At-Takathur and Al-Ma'un are early Meccan period, meaning the first 3 years of the Prophet's message in Mecca. And it is very likely that they were revealed very close to one another, not necessarily right after one another, because there are reports about intervening revelations, but they're definitely quite close to one another. And we don't really, although there are reports that the Takathur was revealed before Al Ma'un, I don't think that we can, with any type of certitude or probability of belief, say that this surah was revealed before the surah in the case of these two surah. But we're going to talk about Al Ma'un first, just because, in terms of the way they. Um, well, maybe I shouldn't talk about Al Ma'un first. Well, no, actually, I'm wrong. We're going to talk about Takathur first, because just in terms of the way the Quran is organized, the Takathur it comes first, and also in deference to the unreliable reports that say, and again, as I said, unreliable reports that say Takathur was in fact revealed before Al Ma'un. Allahu Alam. Okay, so it's short enough. ألهاكم التكاثر حتى زرتم المقابر كلا سوف تعلمون ثم كلا سوف تعلمون كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين لترون الجحيم ثم لترونها عين اليقين ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. Translation, and I'm using Muhammad Asad's translation. You are obsessed by greed for more and more until you go, or until, he says, until you go down to your graves. Nay, in time you will come to understand, and once again, nay, in time you will come to understand. Nay, if you could but understand it, if you could but understand it with an understanding born of certainty, you would indeed most surely behold the blazing fire of hell. In the end, you will indeed most surely behold it with an eye of certainty. And on that day, you will most surely be called to account for what you did with the boon of life. لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. Okay. So, it is short, powerful anchoring, one of these surah that anchors the essence of the Islamic message, and indeed Islamic morality, as we'll see inshallah. So it starts with like an alarm, like calling the human conscience. It's like, coming and knocking clearly and powerfully at the human conscience and confronting it, placing a mirror before the human being, human conscience, to see what, in fact, peering into this mirror, to see what, in fact, you are swept into. ألهاكم التكاثر. Now, takathur, that word is quite remarkable because it has the meaning of you are. The grammatical form conveys the meaning that you are incessantly engaged in an never ending, the very grammatical form in an incessant, constant, continuous process of what? Of attaining more. Now, the more that you are attaining could be a takathur, meaning that you have more children, and that what you're sort of engaged in is just procreation. You're increasing your numbers, but it also has the clear connotation. Stop and reflect. Your entire life is about more. More of what? More of everything. You come into this world with nothing. But al-hakum, the word al-hakum means that you are distracted. It is not just distraction, but it is as if you are placed or put or allow yourself to be in a situation where as if you are magnetized, as if you are your entire senses are overcome, and overcome by what? By this process of moreness, if we could call it that. And and this is so widely reported that it reaches the level of tawatur, according to all the different, even the most demanding schools in the traditions of tawatur. Tawatur means cumulative traditions, so we know of a high degree of reliability. That the Prophet ﷺ, upon reciting Surah Al Takathur, would comment, not once, but would, in several occasions, would comment, human beings say, Mali, Mali, that human beings say, my money, my property. And indeed, human beings, the only thing you have of your money and of your property is what you actually eat or what you actually use. And beyond what you actually consume, actively consume, at a real moral sense, you actually own none of it. What you have not actually consumed, or actually consumed meaning either eat or used, in the ethical sense, it really doesn't belong to you. It is entrusted to you by God. But yet, despite that ethical foundational idea that nothing beyond what you actually wear or eat and use immediately, you actually don't own anything at not the legal level, but at the ethical level. Despite that, human beings are obsessed, driven by the need to augment and increase. And as I said, whether they're augmenting and increasing their progeny, their children, they're augmenting and increasing their material possessions, they're augmenting and increasing their reputation. They want to become more and more famous, more and more respected, more and more honored, augmenting and increasing their power, augmenting and increasing their knowledge. Because as so many have pointed out, that knowledge itself could become its own intoxicant. When knowledge is thought for its own sake, not because it actually, like the food that you consume or the clothes you wear, it actually accrues to the benefit of people, but it actually becomes an intoxicant where you just enjoy it and you want more of it. And then this abrupt point that, well, you are there's what is the word, hypnotized. You're hypnotized by this drive for more until you find yourself in the grave. Now, you come with nothing, you end up in the grave with nothing. And that's the irony of this dynamic. Now, at the same time, in the Islamic tradition, there was a discussion that is material to the moral import of the short surah. When Allah is speaking in this surah and saying, "Al Takathur," that you're hypnotized by this drive to just this competition for more, and then you will end up in your graves, and you will be confronted with the reality of that you have spent a lifetime evading in various ways the reality of what this whole life is about. Is Allah talking to Muslims or to non-Muslims or to both? And to make a long debate short, I mean, Al-Razi, for instance, spends a considerable amount of time going through the arguments for both sides, and then ends up saying that there's no reason, grammatically, linguistically, contextually, to limit what the surah is saying to kuffar or to Muslims. And in fact, there are many compelling reasons that Razi go through why all indications are it's actually what the surah is talking to both. It is talking to the human being qua human being, as a human being. And this point is interesting when we talk about Al Ma'un, because for reasons you will see when we talk about the next surah, inshallah. Okay, so it's talking to human beings as human beings, not to disbelievers or to Muslims, but to everyone. And it's telling everyone there will come a point where all your speculative struggles about what to believe, because Allah, and this is again a point that the serious scholars of Islamic theology write quite a bit about, that even those who are Muslims and even those who believe, and as we will see also when we talk about Surah Al Ma'un, that there will always be this struggle with the demons of doubt. Are we okay? Oh. Devil attack. Okay, with the demons of doubt. that you go back and forth, and you are anchored more strongly in belief than other times. Sometimes your sense of certitude is stronger than other times, but the arc of your life and the fact that you are anchored in moreness, in the drive to attain more, you haven't, even those of you that are anchored in a strong sense of belief, you are not entirely able to be consistent with the norms dictated by the reality of your existence. That if you truly understand all the ways that you come with nothing, you leave with nothing, and what follows the grave, what comes after the grave, it is not your belief in the hereafter that would facilitate back and forth, but it is your commitment to takathur that would be undermined at the very foundations. That you would, it's exactly as the Prophet ﷺ said, you would be thoroughly disabused of the notion that this is my money, my property, my things. And you would relate to things quite differently. There are reports, just because for the sake of thoroughness, that some versions of these reports. Oh, did I lose them?
Should I use my...
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. May Allah protect us from devil attacks in the present moment and in always. So, okay. So I said that the better opinion and the more defensible and the correct opinion is that which says that this is really addressing both Muslims and non-Muslims, whether kuffar or Muslims. This is not the point, and that the point is that now, and I'm trying to okay, so yeah. So just I don't know exactly where things got cut off, but just to get that you come with nothing and you leave with nothing. Now to understand, to truly internalize this sense of awareness, it is not that while most human beings, the drive to augment and increase and accumulate is never in doubt. That is a constant. And what goes up and down, what facilitates, is actually their belief in God and the hereafter. The internalization of the awareness of from nothing to nothing in death, in terms of your relationship to material things, lends you where the Prophet ﷺ precisely told you it will lend you. That you would, saying mali mali, mine, would stop making sense to you. And the only thing that is really yours is what you've consumed. But everything else, you look at yourself as in a relationship of trust. So what you are in doubt of is the drive to accumulate and increase, not your relationship with Allah or the hereafter. Okay, so when it says حتى زرتم المقابر, until you visit your graves, there are, and I was starting to say, perhaps this is where I got cut off, I'm not sure, that there are a number of traditions. For sake of completeness, we should mention them, that attributed, a whole set of them are attributed to Abu Dharr al-Ghafari, that Abu Dharr says, I was not sure about Azab al-Qabr. Azab al-Qabr is the torment of the grave. That upon death, that before the hereafter, that with the minute a person dies, the consequences of their life and suffering the consequences of their life, for better or for worse, starts in the grave. And in these reports, Abu Dharr al-Ghafari says that I was not ever sure about Azab al-Qabr, about the torments of the grave, until I heard Imam Ali radiallahu anh, that this verse or this surah supports Azab al-Qabr. That this surah, when it says حتى زرتم المقابر, that the logic is that the consequences of your life start at the point upon which you enter the grave. Now, we have the same type of reports, now this time not attributed to Abu Dharr al-Ghafari, but attributed to Imam Ali himself, where reportedly Imam Ali says, I was never sure about the torments of the grave until I heard the surah. Now, this I make a long story short because it's not really material to the point we want to make. There is a theme here. There's a narrative type. The narrative type is to claim that someone, whether it is Imam Ali or Abu Dharr al-Ghafari, or in some other reports, there's actually a third person named, I can't remember who it was right now, is in a state of doubt about the torments of the grave. But that upon receiving the surah, they become assured that the Azab al-Qabr is a reality. And methodologically, I am always suspect about these reports that have a content, have a doctrine, and then search, or that doctrine is put in the mouths of different people. I mean, think about it. The chances that someone like Imam Ali would be in doubt about the torments of the grave, someone as close to the Prophet ﷺ as Imam Ali, how could that be? He would know. And even someone like Abu Dharr al-Ghafari, for him to be confused about something like this until he learns about it from Imam Ali. So I don't think the point, and I don't want to spend a lot of time into it, because this is you could end up hours just talking about the evidence for and against what happens right after death, the state of barzakh, the state of the in-between, the state you're in from death until the hereafter. Does it involve an actual, and of course, why is this the important theological issue? Because the Quran often talks about that the accountability, the hisab, starts after the hereafter. So how could it be that you either suffer the consequences for better or for worse before there is a formal accountability, before there is the formal hisab. And doesn't that, is it, because of that tension, there are all these debates about the result. But this is a, I don't think that that's the import of what حتى زرتم المقابر. Why? حتى زرتم المقابر is linguistically here a clear mode of expression signifying death. And whether it happens right at the point of death or whether it happens upon resurrection is really, it's a technicality, but it's entirely immaterial. What's important is what the surah has to tell us comes afterwards. كلا سوف تعلمون ثم كلا سوف تعلمون كلا لو تعلمون علم اليقين لترون الجحيم ثم لترونها عين اليقين ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. Okay, so know verily, most certainly, you will see a jahim. And I'll comment about what a jahim here is in this context in a second. Surely, most certainly, you will see jahim. Indeed, you will see it with absolute certitude. All the doubts, all the shades that allowed you're born with nothing. As you grow, you become socialized in the concept of owning. And if you are coming from a Muslim perspective, not just socialized, but the demonic drive within is to increase and augment. And it's not just augment money and increase in money, but because that's, people often make the mistake of thinking it's just money. But even in reputation, even in power, you want to rise. But the amount of self-deception that a human being engages in order to ignore the inevitable result of all of that, and that comes at death. It is fogs of deception. And the fogs of deception, as you surrender yourself to the drive to own more in everything, reputation, power, prestige, money, what is the cost of all of that? It's your certitude and the strength of your relationship with your Maker. And Allah says very abruptly, you engage in all of this, and whether you know it or not, the consequences is that you allow yourself to be confused about al-Jahim, and I'll comment about al-Jahim in a second. You allow yourself to start saying, well, maybe, is it really what you spend a lifetime distracting yourself from is the simple fact of consequences and accountability. that none of these dynamics with the drive to augment and increase is without consequence. Every bit of money, every bit of reputation, every bit of power, even every bit of knowledge that you spent your whole life adding to is intimately interlinked with the reality of accountability and consequence. But there is a further point here. This is actually, as people like Al-Razi said, and the language actually it says, إن كل أحد يعلم قبح الظلم والكذب وحسن العدل والصدق ولكن لا يعرف قدر آثارها ونتائجها وسوف تعلمون العلم المفصل. So what he's saying is that what is it that Allah is telling us you will come to know, and you will come to know with certitude? Yes, وَتُسْأَلُونَ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ already gives us a hint that the principle of accountability. But what Al-Razi is saying, and this is very compelling as far as I'm concerned as to the meaning of the surah, is that people might intuitively, generally have a sense of this is unjust or this is just, this is good, this is bad, this is ugly, this is beautiful. That they know generally that lying is bad or that justice is good. But what human beings will often do in order to facilitate the drive of takathur is to ignore working through the detailed consequences of each. That if you truly sit and you truly work out, so for instance, this is actually not from Razi, but from Ibn Arabi, that for instance, human beings will often ignore injustice or ignore the consequences of lying unless they suffer from it. Now, what is the difference between when they see injustice and they ignore it when it afflicts others, and when injustice comes to them, afflicts them, they protest most vigorously? What they accept, I might be sitting and I hear about people being tortured, and I don't feel, I might still praise the ruler who tortures X, Y, and Z. But it's very different if I'm arrested and tortured. What's the difference? The difference is that when you suffer the consequences, you can't ignore the details. As long as you can project it outwards and be at arm's length from it, you ignore the details. So you'll ignore the thinking about the seconds and the minutes of agony and pain that someone who is being tortured goes through. You will ignore how it feels to be degraded and humiliated. You will ignore what their family goes through. You will ignore the fact that their loved ones can't sleep at night and can't eat and can't think. You will ignore the fact that their children can't focus on their school and their lives as being. You will ignore all types of things. But when you suffer it, when it comes to you personally, then you can't ignore the details. And that's the difference. And what Al-Razi is saying, and someone like also Ibn Arabi says the same thing but in a different form, that when you see as Jahim, what is Jahim here means is the truth of consequences. You will not need to have suffered the truth of things to know the details. They will be laid bare to you. You will see the result of the injustice you've committed in the minute details of the reality of the thing. You will see the consequences of lying. You will see the consequences of every bit of backbiting, every bit of slander. You will see the consequences of every bit of jealousy. You will see the consequences when you've denied a person their rights or their worth, or because you were jealous, or because you were envious, or because you were insecure. You will receive the absolute truth. The consequences, تعلمون العلم المفصل, as Al-Razi says, that now your sight as to, and in that knowledge, why does Allah describe لَتَرَوُنَّ الجحيم, you will see al-jahim, before that will happen, before لَتُسْأَلُنَّ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ, that before you are asked about the blessings that you've enjoyed. Because al-ilm al-mufassal, now in that stand, in this point, there were no, all the means of obfuscation and distraction will disappear. And you will no longer at that point be able to convince yourself of all the things that human beings use to convince themselves of in order to ignore the confronting the consequences of their moral choices. At-takathur is a relationship to materiality. Now, the relationship to materiality and to self-interest has moral consequences. But the way that we allow ourselves to be the center of the universe, i.e. the problem of egoism, the way we allow ourselves to be that is by ignoring the moral consequences. So, take, I might be a teacher, right? And just for the sake of example, and as a teacher, I am a struggling artist. I'm trying to make it because I am a gifted musician, right? And then I encounter in my class a kid who is a million times more talented than I am. And I struggle to compose a piece of music that takes me years to compose, but this kid is composing what is far superior to what I do, in an hour or even less. Imagine all the defensive psychological mechanisms and all the obfuscations and lies that will go in the process of me suppressing this kid's talent. Not because, if I was confronted with my death, I will freely admit that this kid is far more talented and far more gifted. But because I'm not confronted with death, there's an enormous amount of obfuscations. I might convince myself that, oh yeah, he's talented, but he's a sadist and a psycho, and I have to protect society from the psycho. Or, well, I didn't hurt him. All I said is that, yeah, he's a talented musician, but I also said I warned other teachers he's a difficult student. I didn't really hurt him. Oh, I didn't really hurt him, but I didn't enthusiastically endorse him. And when he asked me to write a recommendations letter, I said, well, talk to another teacher because I'm busy. moral consequences and moral choices, the ethic of takathur, is what obfuscates, and that obfuscation is the jahim. And you then, after this, Allah is saying that after you go into your grave, then all is laid bare. And at that point, you are asked about an-na'im, how you handled, how you negotiated, how you've dealt with the actual blessings that Allah made available to you. In other words, how did you handle the trust? Did you continue to say mali, mali, as the Prophet ﷺ said? My money, mine, mine? Or did you, in fact, your decision-making processes reflected your awareness of the details of the moral consequences of the decisions you make? There are a number of reports, finally. They're fascinating reports, truly fascinating, where we are told some reports say it was Umar ibn al-Khattab, other reports name other companions, that upon the revelation of this surah, maybe I should quote it because it's interesting. Because also it gives you a sense of the challenge of scholarship and what all the work that needs to go into if you don't just shoot from the hip. Okay. So the reports, where is it? Okay. The reports, I'm having a hard time finding it for some reason. The reports that I'm referring to, Omar reportedly reacts by telling the Prophet ﷺ, it says that we will be interrogated about an-na'im, la tus'alunna anin na'im. And he says, in what na'im? We are a persecuted people who don't have qut al-yawm, that we don't have even what the food for a day, or what feeds us for a day. I really want to find it. Okay, so I'm unfortunately I'm gonna have to just paraphrase what. So that's one genre of this reports is that although the person that it's often attributed to is Omar, the other reports will have a member of the again will have a member of the Sahaba will say in reaction to the surah they will say, oh, they'll start panicking, but on such and such day we visited such and such person and he offered us good food. Will we be even asked about this good meal we had? And in all of them, the Prophet ﷺ in 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 one in response to the reported Omar statement that we have so little, so what na'im is it that we're going to be asked about? That the Prophet ﷺ comments, the, your health, your sanity, is itself an abundant na'im. In the reports where you have a member of the companions panic because they're worried that they had a little bit of a fancy meal, that they ate meat, and that they will be now, am I going to be held accountable for eating this nice meal and not thinking of the moral consequences of all the people that cannot eat? The Prophet ﷺ basically says something assuring to comfort this anxiety. Again, make a long story short, because it takes a lot of time to sift through these reports and to see all the different versions and the Omar report, for instance, all the people that have been the same report attributed to, and that sometimes it has the interaction is claimed to have taken place between the Sahabi or a companion or a tabi'i, a successor and a companion, and the Prophet actually is not a part of it at all. And sometimes it is alleged that it is. Make a long story short, what you can extract from these reports is clearly the surah for the innate, intuitive, moral understanding of early Muslims. They got the point, and it is a devastating, psychologically and morally devastating point. It's a very serious point. Are you about takathur? Have you thought of all the moral consequences of your takathur? Because takathur and the more secure you become in your relationship with material things, the weaker you become in your relationship with the immaterial, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm telling you, if that message was not internalized, it would have been impossible for these people to build a civilization. The type of service, that the type of commitment, the type of dedication, the type of sacrifice that the early Muslims had, this is long before the Hijrah. All the persecution is still ahead of them. And they're going to be persecuted, and then they're going to do the Hijrah, and the battle after battle, and the sacrifices, and the martyrhood. And then they're going to change the shape of the world. If they had not internalized this, it would have been impossible to do. Because while today, in our Islam today, you come to someone and say, support a worthy cause, they hem and huff and puff and sit there and negotiate with you, and okay, well, how much? Well, these people would give everything, without everything, literally everything. Here, take it. That is not possible if they had not internalized the message. And what these reports tell me, when you study the numerous versions of them, is that the, the, the impact of the surah reflected in reports of anxiety. I've called this in one of in a scholarly piece epistemic anxiety. Interestingly, I got a message from a Christian professor, a professor of Christian theology, that wrote me recently and said, "I want to. I'm sending you a copy of my book because I want to thank you because I assigned your material to my class, and I've used and referenced, because these people actually reference, they respect intellectual property, they don't just steal things. I used and referenced your concept of epistemic anxiety," and she went on about, you know, why she thought this concept was so helpful. And you know, you take the moment and you just think, how many Muslims, I mean, how many Muslims have even paid attention to, or care, or even if they notice it. Well, actually, I know a well-known, he's named in my diary, a well-known former student, someone who was my student, who wrote an entire dissertation, published this dissertation by a university press. His entire dissertation and his entire book is plagiarized from my work. A dear Muslim brother who I mentored, and the minute he finished from my mentorhood, he plagiarized my scholarship, my thought, my work, and in a different institution than my own, wrote his dissertation and published his dissertation, all plagiarized. And I am sure, I am absolutely confident, he doesn't get a second of thinking, is this haram? Am I going to answer for this in the hereafter? That is why we are backwards, people. Our relationship to morality. Allah has put sunan in this earth, and the sunan is your relationship to morality, to sirat al-mustaqim, is better than X, is better than Y, then Allah's help goes to X. Allah is a moralist, not a tribalist. Anyway, so it is clear that the impact was the sense of moral anxiety, if you will, epistemic anxiety, of we better be very conscious. This message is about being conscientious of your moral consequences, which survives for centuries until we see it in the Razi's text, where Razi says, subhanAllah, as I was looking for the Umar quote, I spotted the Razi quote, but, you know, I moved on, but maybe I'll find it again. Wait. لو فعلت هذا لكان كذا، قال الله تعالى ما لكم ببصر أو لو علمتم ماذا يجب عليكم وما خلقتم واشتغلتم به وراء معطوفة وما غيره لو تعلمون عن الموت فسمعه وأذان قال والحساب، لأن العلوم أنواع، فيصلح لذلك أن يكون علمت علم كذا. من أشد بعض الأمان خرج من وجدوها دليل عظيم للعلماء فإنها دليل. look at the say تهديد في الآية تهديد عظيم للعلماء فإنها دلت على أنه لو حصل اليقين بما في التكاثر والتفاخر من الآفة لتركوا التكاثر والتفاخر. Razi is saying that this is not the quote I was looking for, but it's a different quote. That this in this surah is a serious warning to scholars, because if they understood the moral consequences, their form of takathur is prestige and bragging about knowledge. And if they understood the moral consequences of that takathur, they would abandon their pursuit of prestige and bragging. Anyway, I can't, I don't spot it again. But the language, because I had noted it down, is very, it's a very close paraphrase. أن كل أحد يعلم قبح الظلم والكذب وحسن العدل والصدق ولكن لا يعرف قدر أثارها ونتائجها. So that everyone knows, as I said, that generally that lying is bad, injustice is bad, but it is the awareness of the consequences. So this is Alhaakum Takathur, which is a bedrock moral foundation, a warning. You have a long journey. You're not going to be able to persist on this journey until you refocus your moral compass from takathur to لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ, to a full view towards the accountability paradigm. Okay, let's take a 2-minute break and then start Al Ma'un. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Shall we start? Start? Can you hear me? Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rami, with his tech wizardry, found the text I was looking for. What I was referring to as the anxiety reports, or so. I mean, the examples. روي أن أبا بكر لما نزلت هذه الآية قال يا رسول الله رأيت أكلة أكلتها معك في بيت أبي الهيثم بن التيهان من خبز وشعير ولحم وبصر وماء عذب. So he's saying that the reports attributed to Abu Bakr saying that he starts worrying about a meal he had in the house of Abu al-Haytham, a meal that included bread and meat and so on, and seasoning. So that's an example of one of these. The other, that when the surah was revealed, that Mahmud bin Labid قال, asked the Prophet, يا رسول الله عن أي نعيم نسأل إنما هما الماء والتمر وسيوفنا على عواتقنا والعدو حاضر فعن أي نعيم نسأل قال إن ذلك سيكون. That Mahmud bin Labid says to the Prophet, what naim, what blessings are we going to be asked about? That all we have is water and dates, and we are carrying our swords um, in anticipation of threats from our enemy. And so, and the Prophet ﷺ in this report says, no, you will be asked about every blessing. Um, Notice in this report that the fact that he's saying we are carrying our swords in the in preparation to defend ourselves against our enemy. عواتقنا والعدو حاضر. Uh, There is a version of this report in which you have the same narrative but no reference to the swords. Anyway, part of what then you right away start questioning is that if this is a Meccan surah, um, the paradigm of carrying their swords to defend themselves wasn't relevant until the Medina period. And um, bin Labid is a Meccan figure from the early, and we don't have anything reliable about him after the Hijrah, as far as I can remember. So that that then becomes a question in your mind. There is, of course, every possibility that in fact that someone who would ask the Prophet the same question um, in the Medina period, and that those who would then transmit the report or preserve the report would, knowing that this surah came in the Meccan period, they would remember or misremember the event as having taken place in the Meccan period, although it might have been an incident that took place in the Medina period. Anyway, the other report عن عمر أنه قال أي نعيم نسأل عنه يا رسول الله وقد أخرجنا من ديارنا وأموالنا فقال من أصبح آمنا في سربه معافا في بدنه وعنده قوت يومه فكأنما حيزت له الدنيا بحذافيرها. That Umar says to the Prophet ﷺ, what na'im are we going, what blessings are we going to be asked about? And we have been kicked out of our homes and we've lost all our money. So then the Prophet reportedly responds that whoever wakes up safe in his bed, in good health, finding his livelihood for his day, it's as if the entire world was given to him. There are a lot of questions about this report. Part of it is that, as if you notice, he's talking about how they've lost their homes and their money, and we know that this doesn't happen till the Medina period. Another part of it is you become suspect of this report because it is not consistent with Omar's personality to say something that nearly sounds rude. What blessings are you talking about? It's sort of it's something that you would expect a new Muslim, someone who coming out of the desert, who's a new Muslim, to ask. And this same report that whoever has his health and has the his livelihood for a day, it's as if the entire world has been given to them. In other words, it is human greed that says I don't have enough, even if they have what protects them for their in their immediate life. That statement is narrated in a variety of contexts, in response or addressed to a variety of people. So it could be that the statement is correct, but the circumstances that tell us about why the statement was said are incorrect. These are all matters. I mean, these are the types of ins and outs that, if you talk about the Sirah, that you get into in substantial detail. If you want to teach people how to analytically sift through the chronicles of the past, the Bukhari, the Muslim, and so on, working within the epistemology of their age. They were like preservationists. They preserved a great deal of material within their own ideological. They, of course, like all human beings, had ideological stands. They had ideological biases. They excluded some material because of their ideology. But there were preservationists. Another devil attack. For some reason, I think the devil really doesn't want you guys to hear this. Where did I get a cutoff?
We were talking about the hadith compilers are preserving.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying that consistent with the methodology and the systems of knowledge in the past, our ancestors were preservationists. They preserved a great deal of material, but that never replaces the need for analytical methods that develop and change and to sift through this material. Anyway, that's a conversation for the Sirah if we engage, if Allah wills, and we undertake that project. Anyway, so I just wanted to give you, since Rami found the traditions, an example of these, of the phenomena that I was talking about. Okay, now, Surah Al Ma'un. أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فويل للمصلين الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون. The translation: hast thou ever considered the kind of man who gives the lie? Muhammad Asad translates it as gives the lie to all moral law. Interesting. Behold, it is this kind of man that thrusts the orphan away and feels no urge to feed the needy. Woe then unto those praying ones whose hearts from their prayers are remote. Those who want only to be seen and praised, and withal deny all assistance to their fellow men. Muhammad Asad's translation is actually really interesting. I'll explain why. What happened to? Oh, here it is. Are we still on?
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay. So, the first thing is we have in this surah a number of reports that say oh, sorry, I just remembered in Surah Al Takathur there are reports that say that the occasion for revelation of the surah was that two tribes were bragging about who is more honorable, and that they were citing what they own, their exploits in battle, their ancestors, and that was an occasion, the occasion for revelation for Surah Al Takathur. I had investigated that report, and again, to make a very long story short, there's no basis for it. But it's just, there's no basis for the claim that was the occasion of revelation. Whether that event is historical or not, who knows? But was it some type of bragging between two tribes that triggered the revelation of Surah Al Takathur or Asbab al Nuzul as is claimed? No. So, subhanAllah, I just remembered this because I was just about to talk about claims of occasion of for revelation of Surah Al Ma'un. We have numerous reports that claim either that when Surah Al Ma'un says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ, did you see? It's a rhetorical question. Have you seen? Have you noticed? Have you considered the man or the person that does not believe in deen? And we'll talk about deen in a second. There are all these reports that say, well, it was talking about Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, that it was talking about Abu Sufyan, that it was talking about Abu Jahl. And in all these reports, some of them say that, for instance, a report that says that Abu Sufyan had a meal in which he had served meat, and that a poor orphan boy went up to Abu Sufyan and asked if he can have some of the food that was being served, and Abu Sufyan told him to get lost, just like rudely sent him away. Now, it is entirely consistent with the personalities of Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira and Abu Sufyan and Abu Jahl that they would have been, as alleged in these reports, the type who would be unkind to the needy and unkind to orphans and to make a point of supporting a moral norm of I am powerful, so I am entitled, and those who are powerful and wealthy and rich are under no obligation to care for the poor and the disempowered. It's entirely consistent with everything we know about their personalities. But there is absolutely no evidence that, in fact, that this surah was talking about any specific person, like Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira or Abu Jahl or Abu Sufyan. It's all the evidence is that it's talking about all of them and many more. But was it really addressing itself to any specific individual? No, there's no evidence of that. And it seems that it was entirely speculative on part of the early transmitters that, oh, well, this surah applies to Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira or Abu Sufyan and so on. Okay. So, or that indeed it was triggered by a particular incident. I mean, we have so many reports about Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira's poor treatment of the needy and the poor, and same thing for Abu Sufyan, and again for Abu Jahl. But that any of these specific incidents that we are told about in history triggered Surah Al Ma'un? No, there is no evidence of that. Okay. But there is a very interesting issue about Surah Al Ma'un, and it has to do with how we read and understand the surah. So notice that it starts out by talking about the person who يكذب بالدين, who gives the lie to deen, doesn't believe in deen, and then ill-treats the orphan, and ولا يحض على طعام المسكين, and does not support or promote the feeding of the poor. But then when it talks about فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, that, so who are the people that are threatened here? It is those people who pray, okay? But at the same time, on salatihim sahun, that they are, let's take it for now, ignore their prayer, or are not consistent in their prayers. In fact, perhaps even forget their prayers. Okay? الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون المعون. So يراءون means that al-mura'ah is where it's a form of hypocrisy where you care only as to how you appear, and your actions are inconsistent with the image you project. That's al-mura'ah. So, الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَعُونَ. So those people that Allah is saying that have a problem with their prayers. For now, let's just take it for that. That they have a problem with their prayers. What else do? They care about how they look, not the moral substance of what they do. وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ. And they obstruct assistance. So interpreters of the Quran looked at this and said, okay, the first half, when it talks about يُكَذِّبْ بِالدِّينِ, this sounds like it's talking about the kuffar, a kafir in Mecca, like Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira or Abu Sufyan or Abu Jahl. But then when it talks about those who pray and forget their prayers and care about it, this sounds like it's talking about hypocrites. So some commentators of the Quran then said, well, this must be that the surah the first half of the surah was revealed early in Mecca, talking to the kuffar, and the second half was revealed in Medina, talking about the hypocrites. Because those who pray and there's a problem in their prayer, it sounds like they're hypocrites. It's not that they are disbelievers. But the beginning of the surah talks about يُكَذِّبْ بِالدِّينِ. It sounds like it's talking about disbelievers, not hypocrites. So how do you resolve this? So they said, well, then the first half was revealed in Mecca, the second half was revealed in Medina. But that leaves us with a problem. How can the surah as a coherent whole make sense? If it starts out talking about those who don't believe in deen, and if you translate deen as religion, so they don't believe in Islam, but then it goes on to talk about to those who ignore their prayers and care about their appearances. And the way to resolve this tension between the first half and the second half, people like Razi and Zamakhshari and many others said, well, it's really the entire surah, although it was first half revealed in Mecca, the second half revealed in Medina, it must be that the entire surah is really aimed at hypocrisy. It's not really aimed at people like Abu Jahl or Walid ibn al-Mughira, who are infidels, who are unbelievers. But it's really aimed at the problem of hypocrisy. So that it's saying that the same person who is inconsistent about their prayer and the same person who cares about how they look much more than what the truth of their relationship with God is, and the same person who obstructs goodness, doesn't want to see what is beautiful and good done to the needy and to those who need help, that person is really like someone who doesn't believe in deen. That person is like someone who doesn't believe in religion. However, that interpretation sounds a bit forced, because if it's really talking about the issue of hypocrisy, then why does it need to have why does it need to be a Meccan revelation? So it doesn't resolve the problem of the fact that everyone agrees that at least a lot of some say that the first half was revealed in Mecca, some say the entire thing was revealed in Mecca. But if it's the issue of hypocrisy, so, but this is, however, a red herring. It's really not a real problem if we approach deen from a non-dogmatic point of view. A dogmatic point of view always reads deen as equivalent to Islam. That yukazzibu bid-deen means doesn't believe in Islam. But deen, what is deen? The word is dain. A dain is literally what a person owes. Your dain is what you owe. And dain al-insan, or dainatuhu, is what the moral characteristic of a being is, or the moral identity of a human being. There is we understand from language that it was understood by this is before the Islam, that by the early Arabs we know that how a person navigated their debts was often taken as the truest testament as to their moral character. A person, this is at a time where, securing debts was very insecure. There were no banks. And people were bound by their word. Can you trust someone's word or can't you trust? And as a result, it was seen that people, if you can't rely on their word, then their moral character is bad. If they say and you can't rely on what they say, then their moral character is bad. But if they say and you can rely on it, then their moral character is good. And that was the essence of the relationship also to debt. If I can trust you, if you say you're going to pay me back and you consider yourself bound by it, not only that, but even if you can't do it, then you will make sure either your children will pay off your debts, or your relatives will pay off your debts, or your tribe will pay off your debts. Then you are a person of your word, and therefore dainatuhu, or that their moral character, their diyana, is one in which they are anchored in moral commitment. So this is why it is fascinating that Muhammad Asad translated, and who gives the lie to all moral law, because it's clear he understood exactly the point that I'm trying to make. That yukazzibu bid-deen, in this context, in the early revelation, this is early Meccan revelation, that what dain here doesn't mean necessarily Islam, qua Islam, as Islam, But in a sense, because Islam is moral law. There is no Islam without moral law. If you don't have moral law, you have no Islam. Period. You can't separate the two. It's one of the fallacies of modern Muslims that you can separate moral law from Islam. They're the two sides of the same coin. But here, Surah Al Ma'un is talking about this person who attitude towards moral law, towards their dain, towards their commitments, if you will, normative commitments vis-a-vis Allah, vis-a-vis themselves, is purely functionalistic. It's functional, meaning that if morality serves them, they're with morality. If it doesn't serve them, then the heck with morality. They shift their position towards what is moral or not, depending on whether it works for them. So, as several commentators noticed, and this is not now Muhammad Asad or anything modern, Kalimat dain here, as Zamakhshari for one points out, says means أي الجزاء والحساب والقبح. That dain here means accountability and ugliness. That what you disbelieve in is you don't take seriously that there are going to be consequences where you are going to be held accountable for your commitments and attitude towards moral law. Now, first, Allah gives us an image, a picture, a very powerful, short, in 2 ayat, but it says everything about your functionless attitude towards morality. Why? الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين. Then here, the language becomes perfectly rational. It's not that you're unkind to orphans. No, it's not just that. يدع اليتيم, they don't give the orphan their rights. دع الشيء is when you short what is the word you shortchange something. That so you could use justifications to give orphans a right, and that's often what happens with orphans who have trustees. You use justifications. Oh, I can't trust them with their money. Oh, whatever. Whatever, just, millions of occasions. يدع اليتيم, you shortchange the orphan. And ولا يحض على طعام المسكين, it's not just that they don't feed the needy, but they don't advocate the feeding of the needy. Their attitude is, well, if Allah would have willed, Allah would have fed them. It's like these modern Muslims you hear say, well, Allah made people rich, Allah made people poor, and that's part of Allah's will. The shuyukh that serve authoritarian and despotic dictators, how do they justify the injustice? They say it's Allah's will. So, وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ, this person is, in fact, their attitude is one of self-interest. Take care of yourself. Don't worry about. So what an amazingly powerful image of immorality. You play fast and loose with the orphan because you're in a position to cite all types of justifications and reasons for not taking care of orphans. Well, they're in their orphanage. The state is taking care of them. Oh, well, you can't trust them because they're ill-raised and they don't, as in Egypt they say, مش أولاد ناس. They're not the children of honorable people, so you can't trust them. A million justification for da' al-yatim. Da' al-yatim means that you shortchange the yatim, the orphan. And you're not an advocate of taking care of the needy. So then we come to فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Allah is threatening those who pray. How can Allah threaten those who pray? Okay, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَهُونَ. Here, as several commentators said, that, okay, so we all agree that it's not saying fi salatihim sahun. It's not saying those who, their minds drift or they start daydreaming as they're praying. But an salatihim sahun. The expression here is very meaningful. It is, you could understand it as they are forgetful as to their prayer, in the sense that they forget to pray. But that's not what I think it's saying. It is saying those people who pray, but what does Allah say about prayer? إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ. Allah tells us in the Quran, prayer teaches you not to commit fahsha wal-munkar wal-bagh, not to commit ugliness, immorality, and injustice. So what if your prayer doesn't prevent you from committing ugliness, immorality, and injustice? Those are exactly the people who are an salatihim sahun. They pray, but it means nothing. Then the music of the surah becomes very clear. From the very beginning, it is talking about immoral failure, warning Muslims themselves. Muslims, beware. This is about a moral law. The moral law commits you to being honest and just towards the needy and the disempowered, those who are weak. And not only that, but it commits you to being an advocate for those who need advocates. You pray, great. But if your prayer doesn't teach you to be right, then it's as if you're oblivious to your prayer. You yourself have negated your prayer. Now, further, then Allah completes drawing the moral picture and the moral problem of those who pray, but their prayer doesn't teach them. لا تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي. Their prayer doesn't teach them how to be moral or to be just or to be beautiful. They pray, but they don't believe in moral laws. As Zamakhshari says, they don't really believe in consequences and true accountability. Because if they truly understood the micro consequences of moral decisions, their immorality, they would not be الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. Yura'un, what they really concern themselves about. They know their prayer, whether they pray, but it has no impact on their morality. Allah tells us, by definition, if you're like that, then know very well that Allah knows that what you care about is the appearance of piety, not the truth of piety. The truth of piety is a moral law, is a relationship to moral law. If you are the type that, are full of salams and full of subhanallahs and full of alhamdulillahs and full of Allahu Akbars and full of my brother and my sister, but your conduct is immoral, your prayer is meaningless, and you don't believe in deen. You don't believe in the moral law. You are a liar to yourself. It's just so you don't realize the extent to which you are a liar to yourself. وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ. And then this is the ultimate, as Al-Razi says, the ultimate in immorality. It's not just... Now here, most of us, when we read Yamna'un al-Ma'un, we think, oh, these are really bad people. They are people that go and obstruct helping those who need help. That's the sort of what the tafsir that you get from majority. But that's not, I think, correct. وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَعُونَ means, remember the synchronicity with Surah Al Takathur. And remember what the Prophet ﷺ teaches. The money in your hand, unless you use it and you eat with it, or you actually utilize it in immediate use, is not yours. And this money in your hand, Allah entrusts you as a carrier for others. So Allah, and me to put bluntly, Allah wants the Quran project supported. Allah is not going to put money in the hand of the one who, the scholar who sits there and delivers the Quran project. Allah will put it in the hands of Muslims. But when Muslims fail to deliver the money that they're entrusted with to the purposes that Allah intended, that's yamna'un al-ma'un. You fail to deliver. Yes, you pray. Yes, you pretend you're pious. But you're not an ethical human being. Of course, I use the Quran project because that's what I passionately care about right now, is to make sure that all of this doesn't just die. But think of the orphans and the earthquake. I mean, think of the earthquakes. Think of the victims. Imagine how many people Allah is saying at this moment, the money that is you have is not yours. It belongs to them. You are entrusted with this money to deliver to them. Imagine, and this is exactly the ethic, and I say this, remember that the Islamic civilization was built upon the principle of waqf, al-awqaf. The wealthy understood from their relationship with the Quran, they have no prayer of entering heaven unless their money is, or Allah's money that they're entrusted with, is used to support the right causes. And so they created so many awqaf that when the British occupied Egypt, Afaf Marceau has a wonderful book about this. The British, upon occupying Egypt, were shocked. They found that 90% of the real property in Egypt were awqaf. And they said, what is this? 90% of the property is our trusts, our charitable trusts, and you're telling us we can't touch charitable trusts. We can't even pass laws as charitable trusts, because all charitable trusts there was no ministry of charitable of awqaf, none of the corruption that existed after the British left, and was the ministry of awqaf pillaging all the Islamic awqaf. But literally, the British thought this is a disaster. Only 10% of the land is available for us to pass regulations, and all the rest are just charitable trusts. Look how much our moral deterioration from that paradigm to today's paradigm, where it is truly rare, in my experience, and Allahu A'lam, truly rare to find a Muslim who will tell you this is Allah's money and actually mean it. I mean, rhetoric is easy. Muslims are the best people to when they say Assalamu alaikum, they don't really mean Assalamu alaikum. When they say Allahu Akbar, they don't really mean Allahu Akbar. When they say Alhamdulillah, they don't really mean Alhamdulillah. This is the essence of moral decay, is when words lose their meaning. But now, subhanAllah, look at the synchronicity between Surah Al Takathur and Surah Al Ma'un. Both tell you it's not about appearances and forms. It is about the essence and reality of moral truth. And the essence and reality of moral truth is in the specifics of consequences, because it is the specifics of consequences that define the moral quality of the act. It is what happens from this from the moral stances. What are the consequences? And moral responsibility, because that's the essence, moral responsibility is to be fully aware and fully conscious of the consequences of the decisions and judgments that are made. To the extent that you are oblivious to the consequences and the results, you're amoral. You are not a moral animal. You are something else. And weakness in Iman, which so many people complain about, the malady, the heart of the demon, if you will, is in your relationship to morality. Because those who are truly anchored in a strong sense of morality and honesty in confronting the consequences and accountability, their relationship with Allah is healthy, radiant, and solid. Our relationship with Allah suffers and becomes shaded, shades of darkness. Suffers from shades of darkness when we learn the shame that comes from lying to ourselves. When we ignore the moral consequences, and through that, you learn to be a dishonest human being. And a dishonest human being will never have a solid relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And alhamdulillah, this is Surah Al Takathur and Surah Al Ma'un.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Thank you as always. Incredible two surahs. I thought that I used to do this earlier in our journey, and I thought it would be interesting just to read again. You know how this is the Abdul Halim translation, and there's always just a little short summary of what the surah is about. And it's just amazing because, especially as a convert who doesn't speak Arabic, you're really just reliant on English translations. And so when you go and sit through, a session like this, and then you compare before this, really the only things that you have available to you are what's in English. It's you just see the vast difference. So just to share with you, for Surah 102, Takathur, the description says, it's called Competing for More here. A Meccan surah which criticizes man's preoccupation with worldly wealth and stresses that he will be brought to account on the day of resurrection. That's it. This is a very, straightforward, just sort of like a very surface level descriptor, which really doesn't at all tell you the depth, and then it just has the translation, singular translation. And then for Al Ma'un, it's translated as common kindnesses, a Meccan surah describing some characteristics of a person who denies the judgment. That's it. So, I mean, you just, after sitting through a session like this, you feel so grateful that, just the depth of understanding and you recognize that you're hearing something from your creator that knows you and knows human beings, knows your tendencies, knows your weaknesses, your strengths, what you need to do to elevate and emerge to a much higher station. And there's just no way you could arrive at this understanding from a very simple, I think, from any English translation. So, I mean, this is really incredible. Thank you so much. Let me just open up if anyone has any questions.
What time is it?
9:15 almost.
Okay.
So let me also turn on the chat here. If anyone has any questions and you want to send them through the chat, or does anybody here have any questions? I failed to do this last time when we did Al Nasr. And we were having also some technology issues. So I just wanted to highlight that when you go back and you look at the edited version, you can actually watch it without obviously the technical difficulty. But there's a little extra that was after we went offline. So someone had a question and a comment that was very valuable. So I tacked it on to the end of the edited version. So be sure to go back and check that out. So, any questions? Okay. Nothing. All right. Well, I mean, we can always kind of pick up too. I mean, it's kind of, we've been in the habit of giving people time to reflect and think about questions and come back. So,
These Takathur and Al Ma'un are so heavy in terms of their moral implications. It is not an exaggeration, again, because we confronted this so many times. So many parts of the Quran, if you truly internalize it, your life is transformed immediately. Meaning you can't live your life the same way again. And so it's actually not surprising that people don't have questions, because just taking in what Allah has communicated to us, what Allah, I mean, you hear it, you know it's true. You know it's true. It's undeniable, and yet, how can you escape that? I mean, this is exactly like my whole journey. I mean, I've spent my whole life a student of the Quran, but yet when Allah allows you to see how the first audience of the Quran understood the revelation, what they understood from it, you truly understand why we continue to tell stories about these disciples still today. The Quran, this is the generation of the Quran, truly, the generation of the Quran.
can you tell us about your journey with each of these surahs?
I mean, I don't remember if they were very early on. They were among the earliest. I mean, of course, they were after Iqra and Ikhlas and Al Kafirun and Muddathir and Al Muzammil but they were definitely before any of the longer surah, so it was very early on. And so the methodology, where you work out the methodology, the quirks of how do you resolve conflicts, how do you resolve inconsistencies, so they took a long time, although they're very short surah, because I was working out the methodology of how do you work through all these inconsistencies that you find in the tradition, and conflicting reports and conflicting opinions. But the most important thing that I remember is that these, like Al-Fatiha, we haven't done Fatiha Project Bloom style, but these were shortly, I've done these shortly after Al-Fatiha. And in Al-Fatiha, I came to the conclusion, inshallah we'll talk about it, that As-Sirat al-Mustaqim is nothing but the moral law. When Allah tells us, Ihdina As-Sirat al-Mustaqim, Allah is not talking about rituals at all. Allah is talking about guidance to the path of morality, a life anchored in morality. And that when that you can't say, and so these Takathur and Al Ma'un, which I didn't do, by the way, although I covered them together, but I've done it Takathur, and then I had a number of Surah, and then Al Ma'un. But is that they bolstered my growing awareness that the Arab civilization or the Arab culture before the Quran really didn't speak in any coherent way about husn and qubh, about ugliness and beauty. I mean, what they would describe as husn is the beauty of a horse. Literally, they would just go on forever talking about how beautiful a horse is. And what they described as qubh was entirely tribal and anthropological. You know, it was all about their culture and what their culture defined as ugly or so on. Something happened, a transformation happened through the Quran where this culture that had really no serious at all discourse on what is beautiful and what is ugly, suddenly, and I believe in the first early centuries, the idea of what is beautiful and what is ugly became inseparable from their concept of Islam itself. How did that transformation happen? And surah like Al Ma'un and Takathur, I remember distinctly that these moments of Allah subhanallah, I get it. These are the surah that anchored these barbaric Arabs into an awareness of moral law, and that moral law is the embodiment of beauty, and that not immorality, but amorality in itself is ugliness. It's not that not to respect your word. It's not dishonorable because it insults your fathers or insults your grandfathers, or it's an insult to the honor of the tribe and the reputation of the tribe. No, that it's ugly because it is immoral. And there's a huge difference between saying, didn't respect his word, that's an insult to my tribe, and saying, didn't respect the word, that's unbecoming of a Sirat al-Mustaqim, of God's path. And that's and these surah were the ones that achieved that transformation. So you can imagine how transformative they are. Like when you travel from understanding, first you anchor yourself in Arab culture, everything that was pre-Islamic, and then you understand that transformative moment, and that all these stories that reach us about the Sahaba, about the companions, we say them as if they're baby stories, but there is a history here that we completely miss. The history of moral transformation. That's what the Sirah is about. It's the documentation. Of course, it was documented in a typical, classically medieval way, the way that medieval people would tell things. To our modern consciousness, we don't understand it because, we speak very differently. Our poetry, when you read modern poetry and compare it to pre-Islamic poetry, worlds apart, oceans apart. it was really what it was the medieval way of describing a moral transformation.
This, to me, it just, again, underscores for people who are joining late. At the beginning, I mentioned that next week I'm going to share the details of our now initiative to raise funds to hopefully launch this whole Sira project. And when I hear Sheikh describe, all of that research that allows you literally to be the intellectual bridge between what happened back then, understanding how these medieval people understood things and thought about things and wrote their poetry and talked about moral transformation, and then how we understand things today. It's how valuable is that bridge for us? And if we don't have that bridge, if we don't succeed in raising this money to allow us to receive that knowledge, and Sheikh has to go back to God and that bridge is gone with him, then it will be, who knows if we ever get that bridge again. And if it's 100 years from now, or the next person who becomes obsessed with understanding what happened, we don't know if that will ever come. So it just underscores to me again how valuable, how important this is for us as Muslims to understand that entire arc that you've dedicated your life to studying. So inshallah, I hope that anyone who feels how urgent this is will make it their personal cause also to help us make this whole Sira project come to life. And inshallah, I'll share more next week, inshallah. Thank you so much, Sheikh, for this. Alhamdulillah. Last call for questions. So, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you guys. Sorry for all the double attacks.
Oh,
but,
just the double attacks means
just say A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem.
It means it was a really good session. So, okay, you guys have a wonderful week. Inshallah, we will see you next week.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.